Hello, my name is Bonnie Rowe, and tonight my marriage ends with thunder. One moment I was a wife, the next I was a trespasser in my own life. You ever watch someone smile at you while they quietly erase you? That's the sound you're about to hear. The sound right before the rain attacked. The rain that night didn't fall, it attacked. It hit the marble steps of the Whitmore estate so hard that the sound bounced off the columns like laughter. I stood under the portico, my suitcase already half open, clothes spilling out like small humiliations. The lock had snapped somewhere between the argument and the door slamming. Astria's voice carried over the wind, sharp and rehearsed. "Get out, you low-class creature." She didn't shout. She never shouted. Her calmness was worse than fury. It made the words sound legal, as if she were signing a verdict. I didn't move right away. I watched her pearls catch the lightning, her face smooth and certain, as if this moment had been waiting in her calendar. Calder stood behind her, my husband, his hands pressed into his pockets the way men do when they plan to say nothing. The rain reached me before his defense did. My hair clung to my face. Mascara burned my eyes. Somewhere in me, the part that still wanted to believe whispered, "Say something." He didn't. The door closed with the quiet precision of an elevator gate. I heard the lock slide, a metallic sound too final for love. My name fell from their mouths like dirt. My breath wasn't anger, yet it was disbelief trying to breathe. I knelt to grab the suitcase handle. It slipped. The rain soaked everything. My clothes, my pride, even the goodbye I never got to say. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. Earlier that morning, the sun had been soft through the dining room windows. Seraphine was pouring coffee, the perfect hostess in a cream dress that probably had its own Instagram account. She turned to me, holding a silk scarf between her fingers, the one my mother sent for my birthday, the one she'd chosen herself, saying the color would finally make Charleston forgive your accent. "It suits me better," Seraphine said, wrapping it around her neck. "You don't mind, right?" I smiled, because silence costs less than confrontation. The others at the table didn't even glance up. Laughter spread like perfume, covering the moment until it disappeared. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, pretending to search for sugar I didn't need. The sound of their conversation traveled through the open doorway, a gentle rhythm of inside jokes and careful compliments. I wasn't part of it. I was background noise that could fetch the salt. That was the last straw, though I didn't know it then. The scarf wasn't just fabric. It was proof that my place in that house was transferable. That's where it all started. By night, the air had turned heavy. The gala had ended, guests trickling out with half smiles and full glasses. Astria's pearls glowed in the porch light as she thanked everyone for supporting family values. When the last car left, she turned to me. "You embarrassed us tonight, lingering by the musicians like hired help." I was thanking them. I said quietly, "They played beautifully." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not your role." Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but completely. "And what is my role exactly?" She stepped closer, perfume thick and expensive. "To stay quiet and look grateful. You can't even do that." Then the storm broke, outside and in. Rain slammed against the pillars. Thunder shook the garden. She opened the door wide, a gesture too grand for something so cruel, and grabbed my suitcase from the hallway. It hit the stone steps with a dull thud. Get out. Calder's voice followed, low and distant. Mom, please. She didn't turn. She made her choice. She wanted independence. Now she can have it. My feet wouldn't move. The world blurred into gray streaks, the kind that stain you. The air smelled of wet magnolia and betrayal. I could have begged. I could have screamed. But the quiet felt stronger. The quiet was mine. The lock clicked. The light behind the door dimmed. I stood there until I could no longer tell rain from tears. Rain is honest. It never pretends to like anyone. Looking back, that was the night I stopped asking to be seen. When the thunder swallowed her voice, I realized the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was me. The thunder faded, but the silence that followed remembered everything. It settled on my shoulders like a weight I didn't pack, dragging behind me as I stepped into the motel lobby. The clerk didn't look up, didn't ask questions, didn't even notice I had no suitcase. Maybe I didn't look like someone who owned anything anymore. The pen skipped as I signed the register. The ink bled slightly on the damp paper. It reminded me of the way mascara had blurred down my cheek earlier, smudged, incomplete. That's how I felt walking into the room, half-formed, stripped of edges I thought were mine. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. The room smelled like cleaning fluid and yesterday's coffee. The plastic curtains trembled slightly with the hum of the AIC. I stood in the doorway for longer than I needed to, unsure if this was shelter or sentencing. I sat on the edge of the bed, still soaked, still silent. The rain had stopped, but it hadn't taken the cold with it. That's where it all started to settle. What had just happened wasn't a fluke. It was a process long in the making. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The first time I was erased, it was at a charity event. I wore a black dress, conservative, polished, forgettable. That was the point, according to Astria. Don't draw too much attention, she had said, handing me a brooch like a collar. We're not here for spectacle. I stayed near the back, refilling glasses when they emptied. I wasn't assigned the task. It just happened. People mistook me for staff. I didn't correct them. Can I get more wine? Someone asked. I smiled, reached for the bottle, and poured. No one intervened. Not Calder. Not even Seraphine, who was already seated at the head of the table, explaining the fundraiser's goals as if they were her own. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. That moment didn't break me. It taught me to smile without agreeing. The dress from that night still hangs in the bathroom here. Damp, lifeless, stuck to a cheap plastic hanger. Astria's words echo every time I see it. Not too bright, not too tight. You don't want to make people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. She meant powerful. And she couldn't stand the idea. I never wore red after that night. It felt too honest. What did it cost them to make me small? Apparently nothing, but it cost me pieces I can't get back. Calder called me B. The last week we shared a bed. Not Bonnie, not Love, just B, the same name his mother used when she wanted to sound affectionate in front of guests. It didn't sound like him anymore. It was her voice, filtered through his lips. I started to hear myself only in voicemails. That cheerful recorded version of me that still said, "Hi, this is Bonnie. Leave your message and I'll get back to you." I hadn't changed it. I hadn't updated the lie. It was the only place left where I still existed. overthinking it. Calder had said one night when I asked about it. But it wasn't thinking. It was seeing. I wasn't part of their world. I was their ghost. Useful, invisible, and always just outside the frame. I didn't need to be told I didn't belong. They showed me every time they forgot to say my name. The motel lamp buzzed beside me, a faint flicker that didn't know whether to stay or go. I sat cross-legged on the bed, phone in hand, staring at the little triangle beside the message. I tapped it. Astria's voice poured through the speaker, crisp and careless. She's not family, she's furniture. Sturdy, replaceable. I paused the message at replaceable, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. My thumb hovered over the rewind button, but I didn't press it. I didn't need to hear it again, to believe it. I'd been feeling it for months, maybe years, like the slow withdrawal of warmth in a room where the thermostat wasn't broken. It had just been adjusted without my consent. She hadn't meant for me to hear it. It was part of a conversation she recorded by accident and forwarded in a message chain. An accident she'd never apologize for. Probably didn't even realize it had happened. Probably wouldn't care if she did. Looking back now, I wonder if part of her wanted me to hear it, to finally get the hint. The lamp hummed louder. Or maybe I'd just gone quieter inside. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The gala, flashbulbs, floor-length gowns, men in tuxedos whose hands stayed soft no matter how many businesses they built. I stood near the back of the room that night, watching Seraphine take the mic. She looked every bit the polished daughter-in-law they preferred, smiling without showing teeth, pausing between phrases for just enough time to feel humble. Then Astria took the podium. Her voice carried like it had practice. She thanked everyone for the donations, the effort, the vision. She named Seraphine. She named her youngest son, the one who only showed up for photos. She named the PR team, the donors, the florist. Not me. I was seated 3 rows away, close enough to see the light glint off her wedding ring, the one she never took off, even after her husband passed. Close enough to hear the server behind me whisper, "You okay?" That was the kindest thing anyone said to me that night, and it came from someone paid to disappear. I didn't clap when the room did. My hands rested on my lap like they belonged to someone else. That's where it all started. The morning after, I found the guest list, folded on the edge of the kitchen counter, next to a plate of untouched pastries. My name was there, crossed out in red ink, neatly, deliberately, one line, not erased, corrected, like I had never belonged on the list to begin with. I folded it again and slid it into my wallet, not out of sentimentality. Evidence. I didn't know then why I was saving it. I just knew I would need to remember. I didn't realize it then, but that paper was the first receipt of who they really were. Later that week, Calder called from his office, asked if I could bring the navy tie with the silver flecks. Sure, I said, and hung up. He ended the call with, "Thanks, B." B. Not Bonnie, not Babe, just B. His mother's nickname for me, spoken with a grin and a pat on the shoulder, as if I were a pet that stayed out of trouble. I sat in the car outside his office, tie in hand, and watched him through the glass. He didn't look up, didn't expect me to. It wasn't his voice. It was hers, leaking out of his mouth like steam from a cracked pipe. I was losing him, not to another woman, but to the version of himself that made peace with my disappearance. That was when I stopped asking for answers. I turned off the voice memo. The screen went black. The silence was louder than anything she'd said. I reached for my bag, pulled out a legal pad, and uncapped a pen. The ink rolled smooth. Date. Contract. Witness. I wasn't recording feelings anymore. I was documenting facts. If I was furniture, I'd be the kind with hidden compartments. And I just found the key. The key fit quietly into my palm, cold and ordinary, carrying more intent than any promise. I walked out of the motel bathroom with it still warm between my fingers, body wrapped in an old towel. The memory of Astria's sentence, furniture replaceable, felt less like an accusation now, and more like a contract I had never signed. I folded that thought into the calendar of my mind and circled the nights when her words mattered most. Looking back now, I should have read the fine print sooner. That's where it all started. I remember the investment dinner like a study in polite cruelty. Long mahogany reflected crystal, chandeliers hesitated above necklaces, and rehearsed applause. Astria smiled across the table as if generosity were a performance she had perfected. Bonnie, she said to a donor with casual dismissal. Oh, she prefers volunteering. Finance isn't really her world. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass with careful, private force. I did not break the glass. I kept my composure, because dignity can be sharper than a voice. Looking back now, I should have said something brash and unladylike, something that would have startled them into listening. I didn't. I learned to catalog silence instead. There was a tea the following week that taught me how slow damage could be. The tray looked ordinary. Porcelain, doilies, polite conversation pressed into place like sugar. Asteria watched me accept the cup and commented, warm as weather. You used to drink it just fine. Are we changing stories now? I declined politely. My throat tightened around a familiar, mild allergy, and she tilted her head as if testing a hypothesis. They didn't want me to explode. They preferred that I dissolved a little at a time. I left the cup untouched and felt their gaze catalog my refusal like a blemish to be noted. Looking back now, I should have requested the ingredients and kept a recorder in my pocket. I didn't. I only took a breath and built a ledger in my head. When I came home that evening, boxes awaited me as if I had scheduled my own expulsion. A neatly taped stack by the spare room, labeled in a hand that was careful and final. Your room will be used for a guest, Calder said by the doorway, voice even as if this were a household errand. I opened the boxes to find my linens folded with unfamiliar thrift and my photographs turned face down. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't considered. I was simply relocated like an item of convenience. The humiliation was quieter than the gala, and therefore more precise. Looking back now, I should have called someone a lawyer, a witness, a friend, and not tried to reassign my dignity by myself. I didn't. I only packed what I could carry in my hands. That night, I asked Calder a question that felt like a small, reasonable boundary. I'm not accusing. I said, I'm just asking, when did I become optional? He looked at me the way people look at wallpaper they mean to ignore a familiar discomfort. It's just temporary. He replied, voice soft and trained to soothe before he retreated into safety. You mean like the honeymoon phase was temporary? I answered, and my tone held a quiet that might have been sharper if I wanted it to be. He tried to explain, stumbling over phrases about family image and logistical needs, words that always protect the institution rather than the person. Looking back now, I should have named the betrayal aloud, so it could not be softened by euphemism. I didn't. I measured my response instead. I started to see the pattern in phrases and gestures, the grammar of exclusion. Small comments. You wouldn't understand. We'll handle it. Stitched together into a blanket that covered my face. What they called gentleness was a strategy. What they called concern was a map to my erasure. So I began to write down dates, names, and offhand remarks, assembling a chronology of intent instead of emotion. It felt clinical and strangely empowering to turn insult into ink. Looking back now, I should have trusted that documentation builds its own kind of witness. I did trust it slowly. The contract of marriage has no small print, but perhaps it should have come with a clause about human decency. If a relationship can be revised by habit and opinion, then agreements must be enforced by truth. I lay awake that night on a slender mattress, the key in my pocket, a quiet weight against my hip. I repeated the 3 words on my pad like a prayer: date, contract, witness. For the first time since that rain, I felt a plan that was not rooted in fear, but in procedure. Looking back now, I should have started sooner. I didn't start sooner. I started now. The next morning, I left the box of linens where they lay and walked past the dining room without speaking. I caught Calder's eye for a moment, and there was a tilt in him I did not recognize, an apologetic distance. Seraphine greeted me with that practiced warmth that could be measured in degrees of manipulation. "You've been resting?" she asked, as if our shared history were a commodity to be spun into anecdotes. I answered politely because politeness buys time, and time will let you gather proof. I folded my mouth into a careful smile and carried the ledger in my bag like a small, private weapon. I didn't know what I would need to prove when the time came, but I knew I would not be silenced by suggestions and sympathy anymore. That's where it all started. The ledger stayed in my bag, but the questions started writing themselves in my head. Not sharp ones, not confrontational, just quiet, heavy ones, like, when did kindness become optional? Or, how long can someone look you in the eyes while planning your exit? Dinner that night was the kind where the food looked like it had been negotiated, not cooked. Astria poured the wine herself, a rare gesture which only made me more suspicious. She served Calder first, then Seraphine, then the rest of the table. I was last. That had become tradition. Like Grace said too late, midway through the meal, between asparagus spears and an awkward silence, she said it. Some people just aren't built for legacy, and that's okay. No one responded, but the air did. It shifted. I set my fork down, slowly, not with drama, just decisiveness. I looked at Calder, waiting for a twitch of loyalty, a flicker of disagreement. Anything. He didn't meet my gaze. He reached for his water, drank, swallowed the moment like it was easier than acknowledging it. Silence isn't neutral. It's a side. And tonight, he chose hers. That's where it all started. The next morning, I went looking for a pen. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't angry. I was simply tired of asking for what I should have access to. Calder's study was exactly how he left everything. Precise, sterile, unlived in. Even his desk felt like a showroom model, too perfect, too quiet. I opened the top drawer. A few pens, old receipts, a paperclip. The second drawer stuck for a moment, then gave. Inside was a manila envelope, nothing written on it, but I knew. Sometimes your name screams even when it isn't there. I opened it slowly, hands colder than the room. A draft of a divorce petition, neatly typed, legally formatted, with my name where my future used to be, filed a month ago, before the tea, before the basement, before the boxes. So while I was still smiling at his mother's parties and tucking napkins under his plate, he was drafting my removal. He hadn't signed it, but he'd written it. He was done before I was broken. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even slam the drawer. I just folded the paper back in half, twice like you would with something sacred and dangerous. I slipped it into my bag. I would photocopy it later, because people forget what they said, what they promised, what they destroyed. Paper remembers. That's where it all started. Later that afternoon, I passed the laundry room and saw Maria folding towels. She looked up quickly, nervous, too fast. I forced a smile. "Thanks for saving that scarf," I said, referring to the silk one my mother had sent. "I know you tucked it in the back last week." Maria froze. "I didn't," she said softly. "Mrs. Astria told me to burn it." My mouth didn't move. "I was afraid," she continued. "Please don't tell her I said anything." Even the staff were coached to erase me, erase the memories, erase the objects, erase the woman whose name never looked right on the mailbox anyway. I thanked her anyway, because survival doesn't always feel brave. Sometimes it just feels polite. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. That night, Calder asked if I wanted anything from the kitchen. "No," I said. He hesitated. "You seem distant." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "You don't know where my room is anymore." He blinked. "That's not fair." "Neither is drafting a divorce before asking for one." His face changed, but not fast enough to lie well. "I didn't send it. You wrote it." He didn't reply, just stood there in his socks, like a boy caught skipping curfew. I went upstairs, closed the door, and locked it. Then I pulled out the petition. I made 2 copies, one for me, one for the attorney I hadn't called yet, but would. Then I opened my journal, not the leather one Calder gave me as a gift 2 Christmases ago, the new one, the unmarked one. And I wrote, "I won't scream to be heard. I'll whisper the truth into documents." He'd written my ending. Now, I'd write his correction. The next morning, the house looked too clean, like someone had wiped away the argument along with the dust. Calder was gone early, his half of the coffee pot still full, the kind of quiet apology that always came after silence. I sat at the table with my notes spread in front of me, the ledger, the photocopies, and that one thin folder with the weight of a verdict. I opened my laptop to search for one thing, the Charity Foundation, the same one that Seraphine had been parading around as her passion project, the darling of social media. The logo looked familiar. It should have. I designed it 2 years earlier, sitting at this same table while Calder dictated financial clauses I never really read. "Just a quick review, babe," he'd said, sliding the pages toward me. "You're good with details." He was right about that, just not in the way he meant. Scrolling through the state registry, I froze. The articles of incorporation listed my name, my tax ID, my digital signature, and my home address. Not Seraphine's. Not Astria's. Mine. They thought I wouldn't notice. They were right, until now. A small, incredulous laugh escaped me. It sounded strange in the quiet room, almost defiant. I stared at the screen until my reflection looked back. Hair unbrushed, eyes sharper than I remembered. I wasn't looking at proof of ownership. I was looking at leverage. That's where it all started. I didn't plan to confront anyone immediately. I wanted facts, not drama. So I printed every document, highlighting every signature line with a steady hand. My name repeated again and again, and for once it didn't make me feel small. Maria, the older housekeeper, knocked softly on the door. Her voice was hesitant. "Mrs. Whitmore, you wanted clean sheets." I turned toward her, still holding the papers. "Actually, Maria, can I ask you something?" Her eyes flickered, fear, not curiosity. "Yes, ma'am." "Has anyone else ever lived here? Someone like me?" She lowered her gaze. "You're not the first," she whispered. "There was another woman years ago. She left quietly one night. Never came back. Nobody asked." My fingers tightened around the papers. "Do you remember her name?" Maria shook her head. They stopped saying it. I didn't press her further. I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement between survivors. Astria didn't discard people. She deleted them. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. By the afternoon, I was sitting in a downtown office that smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. My mother's attorney, Mr. Donnelly, was already waiting when I arrived. He looked at me with the kind of familiarity that said Noira had warned him. "I'm guessing this isn't a social visit," he said gently. I slid the foundation paperwork across his desk. "I want to file a formal notice of withdrawal and rights reclamation, effective immediately." He adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Whitmore, this will create a scandal. It will also hit them where it hurts, publicly and financially." "I'm aware," I said. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm reclaiming what's mine." He nodded slowly. "Your mother always said you'd find your own timing." I signed the papers, my pen gliding across each line like a blade. Every stroke felt deliberate, unshakable. If they needed me to be invisible, then my signature would be the loudest thing in the room. That's where it all started. Driving back, the sky was flat and gray, the kind that looks like it's hiding something. The estate loomed at the end of the road, the gates open but uninviting. I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a long time, the envelope in my lap. Inside the house, the dining table gleamed like a stage set. I took a sheet of stationery and wrote in my neatest handwriting, "You said I didn't belong. I agree, just not for the reason you think." I left the note under the vase of lilies she insisted on keeping, even though they smelled like funerals. Upstairs, I packed one suitcase. This time, not because I was being thrown out, but because I was leaving on my own terms. I placed the envelope with the lawyer's seal inside, next to my folded clothes. As I zipped the bag, I felt something loosen inside my chest, not relief, but clarity. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back once. I wasn't planning to go quietly, I whispered. I was planning to go legally, and I had just sent my notice. The driver didn't speak much, which I appreciated. Silence had become a kind of companion, one that let me rehearse without interruption. The ride to the venue was short. but in my chest, the distance spanned years. The gala lights glowed ahead, golden and sharp, like they were meant to burn anyone who didn't belong. They hadn't sent me an invitation. They didn't need to. I wasn't crashing the party. I built it. They just forgot to send me my own invite. That's where it all started. I stepped out of the car, dressed simple, hair pinned up. Nothing flashy. Nothing to distract from the truth. I carried like a second spine. The guard at the entrance recognized me, hesitated, then stepped aside without a word. Even gatekeepers get tired of guarding the wrong doors. Inside, the room shimmered with performance. Clinks of crystal, laughter that rose too quickly, the scent of money masked in cologne and vanilla candles. People looked polished, dull but polished. I moved through the crowd like I belonged, because I did. I passed donors, I'd met women who'd complimented my scarf and asked me for recipes while plotting to replace me at the table. None of them met my eyes. They knew. At the far end of the ballroom stood a screen playing a looped video of the foundation's work. Seraphine's voice narrated it. My words in her tone. My images in her edit. The footage was mine, captured from months of quiet effort, repackaged in high definition. I didn't flinch. That kind of theft only stings when you're still surprised by it. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Then the noise shifted. There was no announcement, no fanfare. Just the hush that happens when power enters a room without asking for permission. My mother walked through the main doors in a navy coat, silver gray hair clipped back. 2 attorneys followed, briefcases in hand, one of them carrying a sealed envelope like it held a flame. Noira didn't glance at me. She walked straight to the coordinator's desk, her heels clicking with precision. I'm delivering this, she said. The envelope opened. Inside, a formal withdrawal of funding, legal ownership documents, and one line of evidence that would reassign the foundation's entire infrastructure. A copy of the Articles of Incorporation, signed by me, not Seraphine. One of the board members blanched. Another whispered something behind his hand. Noira finally turned and scanned the room. My daughter was made a ghost here, she said, voice steady. Tonight, she's the spotlight. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded earned. That's where it all started. I left the crowd behind and walked into the gallery space, my heels soft on the carpet. This was where they had hung the commemorative images, photos of gala events, press shots, and framed letters of appreciation. Mine were gone. Where my portrait had been, one taken at a groundbreaking ceremony for a youth center, now hung a close-up of Seraphine holding a ribbon-cutting scissors. I stepped closer and reached toward the empty nail hole beside it. The original frame had been larger. My hand rested on the spot where it once hung. They didn't just erase me. They filled the space I left with themselves. That was the kind of cruelty that doesn't bruise the skin, it stains the memory. I turned back, rejoining the edge of the ballroom. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. The murmurs had already grown louder than any microphone. Astria stood stiff near the bar, cornered by 2 board members. Her smile twitched at the edges like it had forgotten how to stay in place. Calder hovered by the stage, looking paler than the white wine in his glass. His tie was askew. His silence, again, louder than any apology he never gave. Seraphine was being ushered toward the back, her glossy lipstick cracking just slightly at the corners. I didn't take a seat. I stood near the exit, not hiding, not waiting, just standing still, letting the structure they'd built collapse from its weakest point, the lie they'd told about who owned what. Looking back now, I should have brought backup. I didn't need to. They once said I wasn't built for legacy. Now, they'll need a new architect. The next morning, the headlines did the work for me. Every major outlet in Charleston carried a version of the same truth. The Whitmore Foundation was under review. Their accounts were frozen pending investigation. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, all asking for a comment. I didn't answer. That's where it all started. By noon, I was standing in the Whitmore Building's marble lobby. The same marble where my suitcase once landed in the rain, back when I was being thrown out instead of walking in. This time, I wasn't carrying luggage, only a folder. The receptionist looked up, startled but polite. "Can I help you, Mrs. Whitmore?" I smiled. "Actually, it's Ms. Rowe. And yes, you can." I walked to the center of the lobby where the legal team had gathered, voices hushed, panic disguised as professionalism. One of them started to speak, but I cut him off with a single gesture. "This," I said, placing the final signed declaration on the marble table, "is my formal withdrawal of authorization from all projects and accounts that bear my name. As of today, those accounts are void." The folder landed with a soft thud, but it carried weight. The sound wasn't hollow anymore. It was final. Looking back now, I should have felt fear. I didn't. Just a deep, even breath, the kind that fills every inch of a person who finally decides to take up space. Outside, a storm was threatening again, gray clouds pressing against the glass, mirroring the way the foundation began to crumble from the inside out. That's where it all started. By evening, the emergency board meeting had gone public. I didn't attend, but I didn't have to. My attorney called me afterward. "It's done," he said. "Astria's been removed from the board, effective immediately." "She'll fight it," I replied. "She already tried. They voted unanimously." I pictured her in that room, her pearls trembling, her smile cracking under the fluorescent lights she used to control. Her phone would be lighting up with reporters now, the same people she used to feed stories about family values and charitable integrity. There's a special silence that comes with a person realizing their power was never moral, it was borrowed. And tonight, she'd have to return it. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Later, I stopped by the parking lot outside the venue where the gala had ended the night before. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I just needed to see the building one last time under daylight. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Bonnie!" Calder. His voice cracked my name like it used to say it softly, but now it sounded like a habit he couldn't break. "I never wanted this," he said quickly. "You have to believe that." I turned, slow and measured. "Then maybe you shouldn't have let it happen." He shook his head, eyes rimmed red. "You think I could have stopped her? You don't understand what she's capable of." "No," I said, "you don't understand what I'm capable of." He flinched, then laughed, a brittle, hopeless sound. "So this is what you wanted? To humiliate her? To humiliate me?" I stepped closer. "You did that yourself. You just needed me to show you the paperwork." He stared at the ground, muttering, "I didn't lose you tonight, did I?" "You lost me 3 betrayals ago," I said. "You just didn't notice until now." I walked away before he could answer. The sound of his footsteps didn't follow. That's where it all started. The following morning, I returned to the estate with my mother beside me. Noira didn't speak on the drive. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't avoidance. It was respect. When the gates opened, I almost laughed. They still moved slow, as if trying to remember who they were supposed to let in. Inside, the house smelled the same. Cold roses, polished floors, money pretending to be stability. I went upstairs and gathered what was left of my life. A few books, framed photos, a coat I'd bought myself. No shouting, no tears. As I walked through the foyer, I saw Astria standing by the staircase. Her face was pale, the composure gone. "You think you've won," she said. I paused. "No, I think I stopped losing." Her lips trembled. "You ruined this family." I looked around at the empty hallways, the quiet staff, the hollow echo of a legacy that had been more appearance than truth. "You did that when you forgot what family was." At the door, I turned once more. "You tried to own my name. Now, you'll have to live with yours." The air outside felt different, cleaner, lighter. They had their legacy. Now I'll build mine, without marble, but with memory. It took months to breathe without remembering marble. The sound of it, the way it held heat and silence like a secret. Now, my world was made of wood, warm, uneven, alive. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and photocopied dreams. We'd opened last week. No chandeliers, no polished speeches, just folding chairs and voices that sounded like survival. The sign above the entrance read Row Foundation for Women, and under it in smaller print, "Rebuilding begins here." I didn't build it to replace what I lost. I built it to make sure no one else had to feel that kind of erasure. That's where it all started. Inside, sunlight poured across the floor, touching everything evenly. A group of women sat in a circle, sharing stories that cracked and mended at the same time. Each one of them had been made invisible in some way, by family, by marriage, by polite society that believed silence was elegance. We gave them space to speak, to exist again, without permission. When my mother walked in that afternoon, she brought with her a stack of donation envelopes and the calm authority of someone who'd seen storms before. "You're doing good work," she said. I smiled. "You're funding it." She raised an eyebrow. "Funding, it doesn't mean I created it. You did that." Her words settled quietly in the room, heavier than any applause. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Later that week, an envelope arrived at the center. No return address, my name handwritten across the front in deliberate cursive. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Astria's. I sat with it for a while, tracing the edges with my thumb. The paper felt expensive, like everything she owned. The ink faintly smudged at the corner, as though her hand had trembled just slightly. But I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the filing cabinet in my office and slid the letter into a folder marked unresolved, not unforgiven. Closure doesn't need a reply. Sometimes silence is the most articulate thing you can offer. That's where it all started. That evening, I sat on my mother's balcony overlooking the water. The sun was leaving quietly, the sky holding that bruised purple that only happens in the South. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The cup was one I'd taken from the estate. Nothing special, just familiar. The ocean below moved without hurry, reshaping its edges every few seconds. Watching it, I thought about everything that had tried to define me. Daughter, wife, outsider, problem. None of those words fit anymore. I'm not tidy, I whispered into the wind. I'm not a guest. I'm not who they hoped I'd stay. The words didn't sound bitter. They sounded like truth finally spoken aloud. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. Back at the center, we hosted our first evening workshop for women starting over. A young woman with tired eyes stayed behind after the others left. She lingered near the door, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Of course." "Were you ever scared?" I smiled, the kind that remembers everything without needing to relive it. "Yes," I said, "but I wasn't weak, just quiet for too long." She nodded, eyes glistening, then walked out a little taller than she came in. I stood alone for a while, the lights dimming, the smell of coffee fading. The walls hummed with a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just exists. I didn't need revenge. I needed a new room where I could speak without asking permission. And now I had one. I turned off the lights, opened the front door, and looked out toward the horizon. The first hint of dawn brushed against the rooftops. I've stopped waiting for apologies. Now, I wait for sunrises. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom earned through silence. If you've ever been erased by the very people who called you family, maybe you understand. We don't always get apologies, but we can always choose what we build next. What would you have done in Bonnie's place? Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, sharp justice, and the women who rise from it all.